The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, beginning at the 11th chapter. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal places. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." The Gospel of the Lord.
So we're at the third week of Advent, and that means Christmas is really close. It's like a week and a half away. Anthony's already jumping out of his seat over there, I see. And like many people, I imagine, most of you have done some Christmas shopping already, I guess you've probably been to a holiday party or two. Maybe you've planned Christmas Day for the family that's coming over. You've got the big feast that's all prepared, and of course, I know you're all going to be here Christmas Eve. That's obvious. At 7 and 10:30, there's the plug. Just don't read the fine print on that. And so you'll hopefully be here Christmas Eve, but it's really a time of partying, right? I mean, you go to the mall. I mean, we went the other day, and it's just like Christmas madness, right? I mean, it's Christmas blown up so big everywhere you go. It's just everything is Christmas, and so we get this big holiday message of cheer, glad tidings, and goodwill. And if you're listening to the reading today, I was expecting something earlier in the week when I read this to hear about maybe angels singing, on high, and maybe we get a little shepherd here or there with a lamb thrown over his shoulder, the scene that I'm thinking about, or maybe the wise men are marching towards Bethlehem, perhaps, or, we'll get a little bit of Mary and Joseph on their way on the mule if they go to Egypt for a little while and head back. I mean, I was looking for this Christmas message, because, we're a week and a half away. And what we get is John the Baptist in jail, right? I mean, John the Baptist, who last week was yelling from the rooftops, from the rafters, he's screaming, "You brood of vipers, prepare the way of the Lord." The Lord's going to show up with his winnowing fork, and he's going to separate the wheat from the chaff, and the chaff are going to burn in eternal fire. I mean, he's ready for the big-time Messiah with the big message. He's going to clear the way and set everything right. And instead, this week, we get John the Baptist in the big house, finally getting his phone call in jail, right? He's like, "Here, John, you've got a week or two to live, but we're going to give you your phone call now." So what does John do? He speaks to the disciples of Jesus, and he says, "Send Jesus a message." And the message is this. He says, "Are you the one to come, or are we to wait for another?" So John, who's in jail in large part for proclaiming the message of Jesus Christ as the Messiah, is now having doubts about Jesus. Are you the one, or should we wait for somebody else? And truth be told, when you think about this time of year, December, this is a time that we're here, with a big message of Christmas and joy and parties, but the reality is this month is actually when you see the highest rate of suicide in December, the highest rate of professionals seeking counseling, going to therapy, and the highest rate of depression alcohol use, drug abuse. So the glad tidings and joy is a good message, but I think the headlines tell the story, sadly, and so do our homes, right? That glad tidings and joy are as scarce today as they were 2,000 years ago. With John the Baptist in a dank, dark cell, having doubts about whether or not Jesus was the one. Is his life work all for nothing? So I think we can kind of resonate with John the Baptist being depressed, right? Because, he's in this cell. I can't imagine it's too big. And you don't get to see your friends or family. And, it's 4 walls, pretty tight, I guess. I can't imagine what the food is. It's probably not very good. Then he gets his message. And why is he doubting? Well, I think he believed that the Messiah was going to come and would just change everything, right? And this is what was going to happen. That the Messiah of God's going to show up and change the world. And what he got is what we get today. Sadly, much the same. Still crooks. Still sketchy politicians. Still a lot of poor folk. Not much has changed, right? So it's the same as it was back then as it is today. So, you think about what Jesus said to John's last request, right? Think of this as in a couple days, John is going to die. He dies in prison. So his last request is really to speak to Jesus and say, what's up? I was out in the desert. I was proclaiming and preparing your way. I was making your path straight. And what is Jesus' reply? He says, the lame will walk, the blind will see. The poor will have good news brought to them, and the dead will be raised. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense in me. What is that about? Can you imagine John sitting in the cell and the disciples come back and they say that to John? What? The blind, the poor? John, when you think about John the Baptist for a minute. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John has a very large following. And in the Gospel of John as well. John the Baptist has a large following. We heard about last week how Pharisees and Sadducees and other people of power were coming out into the desert to hear this madman wearing like a hair shirt, talking about, Jesus Christ, the Messiah is coming. He had power, prestige, influence, even, if people of authority are coming to see him in the desert. And so, what does he get from Christ? He gets the lame will walk, the blind will see, the poor will have good news to them. And now, think about where John is now. He has some power and prestige himself, right? And now he's in 4 walls. He's in prison. He's in the big house. He has no power, no agency. He can't do anything. And he gets this sort of bizarre response from Christ. And he's depressed because I think, like all of us, he wanted a strong Messiah who stood up for himself, right? He wanted someone that could smite kings, get rid of all the evil and corruption in the world. He wanted someone who would just make everything all right. This is what he wanted. He wanted a Messiah who could do anything and make everybody obey because of his power. And what he got instead of the strong Messiah was Jesus. And I think that's what each of us get. We get Jesus. For better or for worse. That's what we get. And so John, now sitting in a prison, robbed of all his followers, robbed of all his power, his influence, sitting in 4 square walls, as a last request, gets a message from Jesus to say that the blind will receive their sight, the lame will walk, the lepers will be healed, the dead will be raised, and poor will have good news brought to them. I think if you think about where John is right now, he hears the message from Christ as Christ being, I am for those who have no authority, right? I mean, the poor, the lame, the lepers, the weak, they have no agency. They have no way to change their social circumstance in any way. They're not people who move a nation, they are moved by nations. They're nobody. And John, in his prison cell, is in fact now nobody. He has no power. He's been moved by a nation, right? I mean, Herod threw him in jail. That's who Jesus came for. That's the Messiah that we got. This Jesus who came for those who no one else cares about. And I think in a lot of ways, John, thought of himself probably as a strong prophet. I mean, he gives us some strong words. And that's kind of how we are in a lot of ways. We have our jobs, our relationships, our prestige, our social spot, our homes. We have all the things that we need. I'm not saying that we don't want things, but generally we have the basic things covered. Health insurance. But sort of like John the Baptist, all it takes is one word to change that. One word, like malignant, downsizing, divorce, separation. And then we're on the list that Jesus was talking about, that those who he came for. Just one word is breathed and everything changes. And maybe we're always all on that list. It's just that we tell ourselves we're not. But John, in the prison, finally maybe realizes that the only thing left to have faith in, to depend on, is God. Right? Because he's got nothing else. And all the other things that get in the way of God that we put our faith in and depend on can just disappear in a moment. They always do, right? It always does. Just by one word, one bad word. The truth be told, that's the Christ that we got. The Christ that comes to us in the dark, dank cell like John. When you realize you've got nothing else but Christ. Like God to depend on. God came for the poor, the weak, the disenfranchised, the lost, the lame, the lepers. God came for the dead. And this is the Christ that we get on this third week of Advent. This is the Christ we always get. Because it is depressing this season. And we get the big message of joy and peace. But I don't think we really find joy and peace in that message. We don't find peace in the mall, I don't think. Not me, anyways. I went there to get that gift, and I was like, oh man, it's a madhouse in here. But the peace comes from God. And God reaches out to us in the mess of our lives. Because in the end, we're always the ones on the list. We just tell ourselves that. It's about being fragile humans in awe of the mysterious and majestic God of the universe. That's who we are. And that's the God and the Christ that we got. So thanks be to God, to the God who reaches out to us, even though we are sick, even though we are weak, and even though we will all die. God comes to us amidst all of these things. In fact, God came for us because of all these things. Because we need God. Sometimes we just tell ourselves that we